What's up, guys? Justin here with the RenderingEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp and Enscape tutorial. So continuing this series on my rendering that I've done for this gallery, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of your options for adding backgrounds inside of Enscape. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to go in and I want to add a background in here. And so let's start off by taking a look at what Enscape does if we hit the play button. So I'm just going to hit the play button, and what that's going to do is that's going to pop up Enscape, and it's going to load, and it's going to render based on our image. And you can see how this just by default gives us a pretty good image. And there's a couple things I want to point out, and I may kind of jump outside of the building here just so you can see them, even though we really haven't added sidewalks or anything like that, which may be my next video now that I think about it. But if you take a look at this right now, what this is doing is this is adding a sky, and then the background is just kind of black. And so the sky is nice because if you hold the shift key and click and drag at the right arrow button, that's going to adjust with the Enscape sun and the clouds in order to adjust the way that your lighting works. But the thing is, when you're in here trying to do your rendering, the problem is if you look in the background right now, you have this big like black bar, which isn't very realistic. And so there's a few different things we can do inside of Enscape to get rid of that. The first thing we can do is if we go into the Enscape settings options and we take a look at these, if we go over into atmosphere, there's some built-in solutions we can use in order to add a background. So right now we have a horizon preset set to clear. Well, if I click this drop down, you can see how I actually have options for other horizon options. And so the simplest would just be the white ground, but you can see how that gives us the same problem as the dark ground. So we're going to select one of these other options like the forest. And so if you take a look at the forest, what this is doing is this is adding kind of a panorama image to the background. And so using this kind of panorama background that's already built in can be a really good option depending on what you're trying to do. Like for example, we don't really see a whole lot of this background through these trees back here anyway in the shot that we're trying to get. And so you can see how that can be a pretty good option. The problem with this, and it's not necessarily a problem, is the image is it's not super high resolution, so if you're going to get like really detailed with this, it may not be the right fit. One thing I do want to point out about this though is you can adjust the rotation of these different images, so you can see how I can spin this using this slider in order to get kind of the backdrop that I'm looking for. So this is an easy way to kind of drop that background in here. And so you can also select one of the other presets, like for example there's a town preset in here that you can use to add a background. You can do that as well. And one thing about this overall image right now, even with this Enscape background, is it's a little bit dark, and part of that is because I have my cloud density way up. So if I turn my cloud density down and then adjust this, I'm going to get more sun. But even so, it's still a little bit dim, so probably what I would do is I would go over into the general settings and I would just adjust the exposure brightness up a little bit. So you can see how that's going to adjust the exposure in my image, and so that can give us a pretty good background in here. But sometimes what you want to do is you want to add something in that's just a little bit more realistic. Or just something that has kind of a different view than the stuff that's built in your atmosphere settings. So you do have these options built in, but you also have the option for loading a skybox from file. What loads skybox from file is going to do is that's going to allow you to bring in an HDR image. And this particular image I got from the website HDRI Haven, but I'm going to go ahead and check the box for this, and then once this kind of loads in, and depending on the size of the HDR image, that's going to kind of affect the size of the HDR image file is going to affect how long this takes to load. But you can see how this actually brings that HDR file in, and it applies it as kind of a panorama around this image. And one thing to note about this is when you bring in a file like this one, if I hold the shift key and click and drag, you can see how my shadows aren't changing anymore because it's now using the lighting from the HDR file in order to adjust, or in order to light this image. So, and you can come in here and you can adjust the rotation on that as well just by clicking and dragging the rotation slider. And one thing you may notice about this is when you do this, your shadows are changing as well. And the reason for that is because this HDR file that I've brought in actually contains light information. So that light information is being used to light your scene. And so you can adjust this by using the rotation slider and checking the little option for use brightest point as sun direction. If you uncheck the box for use brightest point as sun direction, you can actually use the Enscape sun in order to create your shadows instead. So I'm just holding the shift key and dragging this like I always do. And so then one other thing you may want to do with this is you may want to adjust the brightness. So the brightness in here is really the brightness is going to be what you're going to be able to use in order to make this HDRI file kind of match what's shown in your actual rendering itself. So you can see how there's actually a checkbox in here. First of all, there's the option for normalize brightness. And what that means is you're going to be able to actually adjust the lighting of that file or the brightness of that file by using a slider. You can see how if I turn that off, this is actually in here and it's really dim. So it doesn't really look very good. And so what you do is you check the box for normalized brightness, and then you can use this slider in order to kind of adjust the brightness of your background and your HDR file until it kind of matches in here. And one thing I don't really like about this one, and I think some of it may just be the point of view that the image was taken from, is the trees do look kind of big in the background. So that is something worth considering, is finding an HDR file that has kind of the right scale and stuff like that. There is no way that I'm aware of to actually adjust the size of that file. But really, that's what I would do in order to bring a background in here quickly. There are other things you could do, like you could put a background in Photoshop. You could also create or apply an image in the background of your SketchUp model. So you could place an image kind of way out there, and I don't have one in, but I have kind of the frame right here. So if you wanted to, you could apply the image as a texture to this face. The one thing you have to be careful about when you do that, if you apply a texture like this one, you can see how I can apply a texture in here and I can kind of use that to fake a background inside of Enscape. But the problem with that is so that's kind of an old school way of doing this, where you could add a background file in here and use it as the background to your image. That does give you a little more control over the scaling. However, you have to be careful because you're going to notice that this is actually casting shadows like this is actually geometry in your model, and you don't necessarily want that. You can get away with it depending on how your sunlight is. I like this method of drawing kind of a big background in here and applying an image to it, but you have to be really careful because this does cast that shadow that can really affect your realism. And as far as I know, there's no way to turn this off, so there's no way to set this so that this doesn't cast a shadow. But it is an option for a way you could add a background inside this image. So you can see how you can kind of see the sky back here and the other things like that through your trees. So if you're just looking for like a quick background, this might be a good option. So I may come back and do another video about working with kind of the textures and the materials in here and just kind of the maps and making them look a little bit more realistic. But overall, and I may come back in and add some sidewalks and stuff as well, because that also kind of affects your realism. But adding the backgrounds is going to be another way that you can really kind of take this rendering to the next level. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought, how you're creating your backgrounds in Enscape. I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you liked this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new rendering content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.